we'd like to begin our event by acknowledging that we're gathered on the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee. Indigenous peoples are the original title holders and stewards of these lands and waters. The Cinema Politica team believes it is not enough to only acknowledge the keepers of the land. We encourage everyone who attends our screenings to become informed and involved in anti-colonial and Indigenous struggles and resistance. Wherever Indigenous peoples are protecting or reasserting control over their territories today, they're at the front line of our collective struggle to protect and steward our planet. Okay, thank you. So we've had a few problems getting filmmakers into the country this semester, and Rahul Jain is one of them. He could not afford to have the Canadian Embassy keep his passport for 3 weeks because he's traveling all over with his film, and that would have grounded him, and so he was unable to make the visa work to come to Canada to be with us tonight. But the good news is he will be joining us right after the screening on Skype. And then he does have another screening in Los Angeles at 6 o'clock their time, 9 o'clock our time, so we're going to have about a half hour for the Q&A. The film's 110 minutes. And one thing I'd like to say is that the film has won a few awards, and including the Best Cinematography Award at Sundance. It's his debut feature, and I think what's interesting about these kinds of films is they might not be typical films in terms of looking at the 15-year history of Cinema Politica or looking at the 800 films that are circulating throughout our global network of about 100 screening locations all over the world. But that you can think about political documentaries, or I do, as a spectrum between a pamphlet and a painting. And the pamphlets have a lot of information, and the paintings are a little more artful. And I'd say this one is leaning towards more of the painting. But it's still a very deeply politically engaged film, and I hope you all enjoy it. And I hope you stick around for the Q&A with Rahul Jain, the director, afterwards. Thank you. There's a few hundred people here who watched your film. Thank you so much for sharing it with us and for taking a bit of time to talk with us. We understand you're on your way to a screening right now, yes?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I guess I'll start with a question. And the first one is, the film's won some awards for cinematography. And obviously it's a very visually beautiful film, but I'm wondering if you can talk about the sound and your approach to sound. And I know you told our projectionist to play the film 10% louder than we normally would play a film. So maybe we can start with that.
Yeah, I was wondering throughout the making of the film, if seeing is believing, then what is feeling? And over a lot of thinking, I came to the realization that it's hearing. If seeing is believing, then hearing is feeling. And I spent an extensive amount of effort and thought on figuring out how to replicate and emulate the sound, the sonic experience that I get when I enter the factory. You walk in and you can close your eyes, and if you stand there somewhere just listening to the sound for 2 minutes, 3 minutes, you realize that there are different frequencies and vibrations that are in some kind of a odd synergy with each other. And they all tell a story. Each sound tells a story that this is happening. So I was just trying to get that feeling.
Okay, you can put up your hands if you have a question. We have 2 mics. I have another one for you. I read in an interview that you said you didn't want to provide any answers necessarily with this film to the audience. Can you explain that and maybe why you took that position?
One of my favorite filmmakers, Krzysztof Kieslowski, said, "It's upon you as a filmmaker to decide if you want to make the whole cake or give out a slice of life." And I'm more content with making a limited experience, the same way I view life. I don't think the questions that I went inside the factory with, and after 2 years of work, I just had more questions. You know, there were no answers, and no answers are easy in things of socioeconomic concern. Like when the people in the circle ask me what to do, what can we do, I kind of wanted to tell them, kill your bosses, because that's the easy answer, revolution bottom to up, because there's no other way. But of course, I didn't say that. So, yeah, I don't know if that was your question.
No, that's good, but actually, what did you say to them? Because that's a very interesting scene where they implicate you and say you're going to come and find out their stories, but like the ministers, you might leave. And so what did you say to them? And how do you feel about them questioning you in that scene?
In films, just like in life, what you don't see is just as important as what you see. The reason I take myself out of the equation throughout the film systematically is so that there's almost a direct communication with the audience, and the people are directly speaking to them. Of course, nonetheless, through my filter, which can be edited out. I didn't really have any answers for them, though. And that's the same way I presented in the film. I hope that somebody in the audience does have an answer.
Or they might have just more questions.
Through many different connections, I was able to talk to many different factory owners, and this was the factory that I thought had the densest, thickest, and almost ironically richest environment for the kind of factory film that I wanted to make. I told the bosses that I just wanted to show the world how they give many people jobs, which is almost a white lie. It kind of messes with my brain a bit that this one particular factory might be made the example out of, because a threatened government or party in a third world country, the kind of power that they command and concentrate at their will allows them to make an example out of somebody or something they don't like. So in this case, even though there are millions of factories, yes, this factory owner and the factory will be vulnerable to being subjected to particular harsher inspections for getting caught. But I think in the larger, grander scheme of things, with wide paintbrush strokes, I'm glad that the film exists. And yeah, I hope that answers your question. Most of the things these people are saying are known to everybody in this area. The factory workers themselves, who are vulnerable enough to share the things they feel, I use 7 out of 500 interviews in the film. Most of the workers don't come back after they go home every year, at least once, to visit their families. So when they come, because they don't have any vacation packages or something like that in their working terms, when they come back, their jobs have been passed over to someone else. So, yeah. They're customers from Egypt, and the fabric from here goes to the Occident. I mean, you might know some companies that I necessarily don't want to name, but they send products everywhere, from Scandinavia to Western Europe to North America to South America. But their main market is in Southeast Asia and North Africa and Middle East. There's a psychological term called reality principle. I don't know much about it, but one of my professors critiqued my film in its rough stages, and he told me about it, that people tell themselves whatever they need to make it to the next day. even though everybody in their own opinion are never villains in their own life. They're doing something good. Or um, I think the manager is the way he is, not just because of economics or because of efficiency movements that happened in the first decade of the 20th century, things like Fordism or Taylorism, but he's just the way he is because of what he does. I don't know if there's, I'm sure that he could be more humane, but for some reason he chooses to not be like this. I know many people who would rather not see a film like this and be made to think. So yeah. We just had our national premiere last month in a film festival in India, where the film was competing in the main competition with only fiction films, and it got a lot of coverage, and we won something at the festival. So there were some distribution things happening, but we also have had for a while the funding as a grant to play the film in a few factory town cinemas, where we rent the factory town cinemas where the workers are working, and play the film on loop for a week, and anybody can go in. Um, it's just that while I was making the film, I really didn't know who I was making it for, who the main audience was, and I kind of still don't really know it for a fact. There is no Netflix-like algorithm that I have about who might be watching this film or be into it. But one thing I can very strongly feel is that when somebody works for 12, 24, 36, 48 hours, sometimes straight for 15 days, I don't know how they would feel about taking a break and going to see a film about their lives. It might feel like Groundhog Day a bit. Uh, yeah. So in hindsight, I've kind of felt that it is for middle class or upper middle class, um, bourgeois, perhaps audiences in my country, and so much so around the world as well. Yeah. There were 8 screenings in Mumbai, and after every screening, there were some businessmen coming up to me and saying, "But you really don't know how things are. You should become a businessman or industrialist and try to see how it feels like to manage such a dense working environment. I think this factory is completely fine, and you're just doing this for Europeans to show them something that they want to see." So yeah, there's a spectrum of reception and perception on that's quite wide. But on one scale, there were many people, I would say, middle class and working class, even in India, that are fascinated by films, not as much as politics, but films by itself, who kind of went to see the film because of its um, international press generated. So that definitely helped in that way. And I think people went in for an aesthetic experience instead of a political one, but they all kind of get their heads tripped out. They've never really seen um, such sumptuous reimagination of a completely working class environment, uh, and because most of those representations usually lack from the mainstream sources of distribution. Um, so when I was filming there for 3 years, the working age for child labor or labor, the minimum age was 16. And then the same person who was the chief minister in the state where I made this film called Gujarat, his name is Narendra Modi, and that point of time in the beginning of this film shooting, he was the chief minister, ascending to become the prime minister of the country. And once he came into power, he reduced that working age from 16 to 14. So, yeah, it's kind of regressive. I don't really know what to say. Um, but, I mean, I think even 16 is not okay, even if it's law, you know. So there are really no that many checks, regulations, and I think, yeah, a lot of this is happening because of that, no regulations. Uh, well, their lifespans, their mortality rate drops down to the age of 50. That's the average lifespan of somebody there. So physically and psychosomatically, perhaps, psychologically, yes, they are affected by quite a rigorous and densely intense sensory environment, which is always almost overflooding their receptive capacities. And I mean, I was doing the sound of the film for quite a while, and I lost my hearing. For 2 years, I had tinnitus. So most of the workers working there use headphones, and they blast music while their ears are being pummeled by factory machine sounds. So it's kind of doubly impacting. When they go home back to their villages, they say that their senses are completely numb, and they dream about the intense sounds, intense smells, everything like that. Yes. Um, one has to accept the fact, be it from the creator or the audience's perspective, that a film like this comes from a certain kind of curiosities, and most of the people, the bosses and the workers, the visitors, all thought this was a bit crazy, that some guy with a camera was there for a few months doing his thing the whole time, so like obsessive and possessively. To them, there was literally like no, like I must be completely out of an existential purpose to be doing something like this. And because from their perspective, their lives are quite droll. And and it's yeah. I mean, their aesthetic experiences, like of being really completely exhausted. Even the boss or the worker. I mean, the boss sits on his chair the whole day in an air-conditioned room, looking at a screen or taking phone calls. The workers kind of have a experience of complete physical degradation in a spatio-temporal order. So it's all kind of very forsaken, I would say. The aesthetic experience, perhaps. It's almost numbing. I witnessed and I experienced accidents and violence, and I got to document it as well. And it's just that I was not really interested in setting the tone of the film from a perspective of explicit violence, because I was systemically and structurally more keen on establishing the violence of the everyday, the violence of the labor, which is almost a um, hidden violence. It's almost untangible. It's slow. It's almost like on a geological time scale in terms of what it does to the human physiology and psychology. So um, yeah, there was blood. The infrastructure, as you might have seen, is quite quite compromised. That's a great question that I hope everybody can ponder about. I don't really have the answer to this one. It's I understand the place that your question is coming from. Um, I feel unfit, even though I spent 3 years there. I feel unfit to provide a definitive answer to this. It's got to be, I guess, on subjective realms. Um, hmm. Unity is absolutely one of the primary um, termites of, or the lack of it is what's hollowing um, solid action in so many ways. It's the age of information right now, and I guess it's the age of misinformation too. And those people who have not really been educated properly are very easy to manipulate. Most of them really do believe that any kind of unionization is a regressive evil, and yeah, I mean, you could almost have information campaigns, but I think a businessman or a business person, no matter what you do, will always be focusing on their profits. I think it's the government as the sovereign power that births you in its capacity has to be very, very responsible in terms of caretaking of its people. And most people that are working in a space like this have got to that place in the first place because they feel like there's nobody looking out for them. So I don't know if that really answers your question properly, but the people who are responsible for um, dealing with this, I feel, are somewhere not doing their job properly. It was just me and my best friend, Rodrigo Trejo Villanueva. We met in school, and he was my senior, and I shot something alone, and I then showed it to him, and I was like, you gotta come with me, I need to be with somebody who I can telepathically communicate with. And we were using a Sony FS700, and we only used two primes, 50 and 28. That really helped us decide and focus in on some kind of a visual strategy. I think the 50 millimeter is a brilliant, brilliant, brilliant lens. I was doing the sound for the longest time, and it was just recording lots and lots of vibrations. But everything was kind of broken in small things, and the time we were there was so long that we kind of established routines and became really, really fast and quick, agile. Rodrigo was doing almost everything physically by himself without any assistance, but many times I was tying him and myself with a rope and walking while we were doing the Steadicam shots. There were certainly many ethical conflicts, like to film a sleeping person. And it was interesting the way he did things. He's a very courageous and bold person, and I think that's how cinematographers should be. I was a bit in my own head and anxious many times, like maybe I should do that or not, and he was already doing it as soon as I communicated to him what I was thinking of. So yeah.
Okay, I think we should let you go to your screening, and thank you so much for pulling over and not doing the Q&A while you were driving. And all the best with the film, and thank you so much for sharing with us and taking the time.
Thank you so much. Thank you for really coming, and I hope you can talk to your friends about it.
Hang on, start over. We couldn't hear you because everyone was clapping. Go ahead.
Oh, thank you. I just wanted you to share the film with your friends and people you know, because we don't really have any way to get out, do publicity. It gets around with word of mouth. And yeah, thank you so much for coming, really.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, everyone.